Wars are not decided only at the front lines. They are decided where fuel runs out, supply chains collapse, and military strength suddenly turns into operational paralysis. Over nearly 3 decades, I have analyzed fuel systems, logistics, and combat operations. I have studied how armies collapse, how supply chains break apart, and how even the most technologically advanced armed forces in the world become irrelevant the moment fuel stops flowing. And I can say with full professional conviction that what Iran carried out over the past 96 hours belongs among the most strategically precise and operationally consequential campaigns of logistical disruption in modern warfare. Not because of the weapons used, not because of the scale of destruction, but because of the precision of the thinking behind it. Iran did not attempt to force the IDF into a direct battle. That was unnecessary. Instead, Tehran identified the most critical vulnerability within Israel's entire warfighting architecture. Not a weakness in armor, not a weakness in the Air Force, not a weakness in tactical doctrine, but a weakness rooted in the basic physics of mechanized warfare. Without fuel, no army moves. Without fuel, no tank maneuvers. Without fuel, the most expensive combat vehicle in the world becomes an immobile piece of steel. And that is exactly where Iran struck. With a level of completeness that has now left 300 Israeli tanks immobilized on the northern and central fronts. Their engines are cold. Their crews remain behind advanced armor, but without operational capability. An MKW battle tank, the pride of Israeli military engineering, a vehicle worth more than $6 million, is without diesel, nothing more than an extremely expensive bunker. It cannot evade. It cannot exploit a breakthrough. It cannot respond to new threats. It cannot fight the way a tank is meant to fight. Within 96 hours, Iran effectively shut down nearly every major oil route supplying the operational fuel network of the IDF. The pipeline connection between the Haifa import terminal and the northern distribution network was struck and disabled during the opening phase. The Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, Israel's alternative import axis through the Red Sea, was simultaneously blocked through coordinated Houthi actions that disrupted access along the southern route. Land convoys moving from central depots to forward armored formations were hit by precision drones that destroyed fuel trucks faster than they could be replaced. And the forward fuel points, those final distribution nodes at brigade and battalion level, were eliminated one by one, with an accuracy indicating a surveillance and intelligence architecture that had spent years building target files. By the time Washington recognized the full scale of the situation, the operational reality on the ground had already become irreversible within every militarily relevant time frame. 300 tanks stood still, armored personnel carriers ran dry, artillery transport vehicles could no longer reposition. The Air Force consumed its reserves at a rate that reduced its operational flight capability from weeks to days. The Pentagon did not panic quietly. The panic was visible. In emergency meetings between agencies, in frantic phone calls between Washington and Tel Aviv, and in the complete absence of a coherent public response, because no response existed that matched the scale of the situation. What now needs to be analyzed are 4 questions. First, how was Iran able to identify, target, and destroy all fuel routes supplying the IDF at the same time? Second, what does this precision reveal about the intelligence architecture Tehran has built over the years? Third, what does it actually mean for a modern armored force when its fuel supply is cut off? How quickly does combat capability collapse? What options remain? And why is the 96-hour timeline not an exaggeration, but a conservative operational assessment? Fourth, why is Washington reacting not with controlled concern, but with genuine institutional panic? And what does the absence of a credible American response reveal about the condition of American power projection in a Middle East that no longer accepts rules written by Washington? When 300 tanks are immobilized and the fuel has vanished, only one question ultimately remains. Who writes the terms of the conflict? The architecture of this Iranian campaign must be understood in all of its sophistication. This was not an operation designed to destroy as much infrastructure as possible. It was an operation intended to destroy precisely the infrastructure whose failure would create fuel shortages across the entire operational system of the IDF within the shortest possible time. That is the difference between brute force and surgical precision. The campaign began with a comprehensive attack on Israel's oil import infrastructure. Israel imports nearly all of its petroleum needs. Significant domestic oil production practically does not exist. This dependency is a structural vulnerability that every serious military planner immediately recognizes. The question was never whether to attack it. The question was how to attack it so completely that no alternative route could maintain the required throughput. Tehran's answer was simultaneity. All routes were attacked within nearly the same operational window, preventing Israel from compensating for the loss of one route through increased use of another. The oil terminal at the port of Haifa, through which a large share of Israeli imports passes, was struck in the opening phase with a combined package of jet-powered Shahed-23 drones and precise Fateh 110 missiles. Not only tanks were targeted, but also pipeline junctions, loading infrastructure, and ship-to-land transfer systems were struck in a sequence designed not for repairable damage, but for functional destruction. Within hours, the terminal's operational capacity had fallen to zero. Then Ashdod followed. The timing was critical. After Haifa, Israeli logisticians immediately had to assess whether import volumes could be redirected through Ashdod. 3 hours were enough to begin emergency planning, but not enough to implement physical rerouting. When Ashdod was hit, the attack destroyed not only infrastructure, but also the newly identified fallback option itself. The Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline was targeted in parallel. This 254-kilometer connection between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean coast is Israel's most important alternative petroleum corridor outside the northern ports. Iran did not attack only the pipeline itself. Precision strikes hit above-ground pumping stations at critical points, destroying electrical and mechanical systems and making rapid repairs impossible. At the same time, Houthi forces blocked maritime access to Eilat. Even if pumps could have been replaced quickly, no tankers would have been able to deliver sufficient supplies anymore. After the import level came the distribution level. Israel's military fuel system functions in 3 stages: strategic reserves in protected storage facilities, regional depots serving as buffers between national reserves and combat units, and forward fuel points supplying tanks, vehicles, and aircraft at the final mile. Iran struck 11 regional depots across the north, center, and south within a 2-hour operational window. This simultaneity was operationally decisive. It prevented Logistics Command from redistributing fuel from undamaged depots. All relevant nodes were hit before redistribution could even be organized. The forward fuel points were then shattered through a sustained drone campaign. Loitering munitions tracked convoys, identified tanker vehicles, and destroyed them one by one. The loss of the fuel truck fleet created a final gap that could no longer be bridged, even in areas where fuel theoretically still existed. The cumulative effect of these 3 phases was the complete disruption of operational fuel flow to ground and air forces within 96 hours. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, self-propelled artillery, and support vehicles consumed their internal reserves and came to a halt. The timeline is determined by consumption and operational tempo. A Merkava 4 carries roughly 1,400 liters of diesel fuel. Under combat conditions involving movement, target engagement, and continuously running onboard systems, consumption can reach several hundred liters per hour. A tank operating 8 to 10 hours daily under battlefield conditions drains its reserves within only a few days if no resupply arrives. The moment resupply is cut off on the first day, the countdown begins. High operational intensity accelerates it. The 300 tanks now standing still were committed at exactly this level of intensity. An immobilized tank is not merely a tank that cannot move. It loses the core of its tactical value. Maneuver is the foundation of armored warfare. A tank that cannot maneuver cannot exploit breakthroughs, respond to flanking threats, reposition to new firing locations, or withdraw from a deteriorating situation. It becomes a fixed position with expensive weaponry, useful for holding a single point, but incapable of conducting mobile warfare. The consequences extend far beyond the tanks themselves. Armored personnel carriers lose their mobile infantry function once fuel disappears. Infantry that can no longer be redeployed become static and therefore more vulnerable to precision drones and missiles. Self-propelled artillery requires fuel not only for movement, but also for generators, fire control systems, and communications. Without fuel, it becomes metal that can only be coordinated to a limited degree. The Air Force intensifies this crisis further. Israeli air bases maintain operational reserves that cannot sustain intensive operations indefinitely. When import terminals are destroyed and distribution networks interrupted, these reserves are consumed without being replaced. At the same time, the situation on the ground forces the Air Force to increase operations, not reduce them. Every additional sortie flown to support immobilized units shortens the remaining operational flight capacity. What emerges is not an isolated bottleneck. A cascading effect emerges. The psychological dimension is equally decisive. An army whose vehicles are running dry knows that its situation is deteriorating faster than it can be corrected. Soldiers inside the tanks watch their fuel indicators fall. They receive no credible information about when fuel will arrive. This uncertainty erodes trust, cohesion, and offensive readiness like acid. It cannot be measured precisely, but it can be stated with certainty that it is growing. Washington understands this, and that is exactly why the reaction is not a normal crisis routine. Controlled concern recognizes a problem and activates prepared responses. Real panic begins when an institution realizes that its prepared responses do not exist. The obvious option of supplying forward units with fuel through an airlift fails because of the physics of mass. 300 tanks and their associated support vehicles require millions of liters. Even a maximum American airlift using C-17 and C-5 aircraft could deliver only a fraction of what ground and air forces consume at the current pace. An airlift can slow deterioration. It can demonstrate activity. It cannot reverse reality. The maritime option is equally blocked. Fuel tankers could theoretically be escorted to Israel, but Haifa is no longer functional. Ashdod has been struck, and Eilat is effectively cut off through the Red Sea. A tanker would have no port capable of receiving large volumes within a relevant time frame. The infrastructure for mass imports no longer exists operationally. Direct American strikes against Iranian launch sites, drone bases, and missile systems carry escalation costs that are politically difficult to absorb. Strikes on Iranian territory could permanently close the Strait of Hormuz and drive oil prices to levels that would create global and domestic consequences no government could easily control. The escalation ladder offers no stable exit. That is the real truth beneath the noise of emergency meetings. American power remains enormous in many respects, but it is not a simple solution against a regional opponent that identified the specific vulnerability of an ally and attacked it in a way that makes every American corrective action risk consequences worse than the original problem. This is not merely a failure of American capability. It is a structural feature of a strategic environment Iran has patiently prepared over many years. Particularly striking is the restraint in target selection. Iran chose to immobilize the IDF rather than directly destroy it. That distinction is central. Direct destruction would have produced heavy casualties, dramatic imagery, international outrage, and possibly faster escalation. Immobilization achieves nearly the same operational result while keeping the escalation temperature lower and preserving Tehran's diplomatic position. Strikes on fuel depots, pumping stations, and terminals create industrial fires. They are dramatic, but they do not produce the same human imagery as mass casualties in residential areas. Iran neutralized offensive combat power while simultaneously minimizing political costs. This is strategic behavior from a military leadership that has studied its opponent carefully. It understands that modern wars are decided not only on the battlefield, but also in the information sphere, in capitals, and in markets. What follows from this? Operationally, it is certain that Israel cannot restore its fuel infrastructure within a time frame capable of saving the current campaign. Petroleum terminals require months, specialized equipment, and secure working environments. A destroyed fleet of fuel trucks cannot be replaced overnight. Improvised routes cannot provide the throughput necessary for large armored operations. The mechanized combat capability of the IDF will therefore continue to decline. Existing fuel reserves will be consumed. The immobilized tanks will remain immobile, and the previous form of the Israeli campaign, built on armored maneuver, air support, and logistical depth, can no longer continue in its current form. In Moscow, this outcome will be viewed with sober satisfaction. Russia's contribution through technology, diplomatic cover, and strategic partnership has been validated without Russia having to fight directly. Washington's attention and resources are being tied down, resources missing from other fronts. In Beijing, observers will study the method above all else. Every army dependent on imported fuel carries the same vulnerability. The targeting method, the sequence of attacks, the intelligence preparation, and the simultaneous destruction of import systems, distribution networks, and final-mile logistics are transferable lessons. Because that is the deeper point of this entire operation. Modern armed forces like to speak about sensors, precision, air superiority, and digital warfare. But every one of these capabilities depends on a material foundation that is not digital: fuel, transport, maintenance, spare parts, storage, pumps, ports, pipelines, and the people who keep these systems functioning. Whoever looks only at the weapon sees the surface. Whoever studies logistics sees the nervous system. Iran did not attack the most visible layer, but the layer that makes everything visible possible in the first place. That is why this campaign is so dangerous for every military that relies too heavily on technological superiority. Technology can make strikes more precise, it can accelerate reconnaissance, it can shorten command chains, but it cannot move a tank when the fuel tank is empty. It cannot keep an air force in the sky when reserves are not replenished, and it cannot preserve a strategic order when the logistics supporting that order are exposed as vulnerable. In this sense, the Iranian operation is not only an attack on Israel, it is a message to every power that believes superiority means invulnerability. And that is exactly why this moment will be studied far beyond the region, not as an exception, but as a warning against logistical overconfidence under real modern wartime conditions. For the international order, the significance is greater than the number 300. The assumption was that American support could compensate for any operational setback suffered by an ally in time. That assumption has been broken. The Iranian operation moved faster than the American institutional response. This is the operational form of a strategic shift that has been growing for years. The Middle East that existed before these 96 hours no longer exists. A region in which American backing was considered a guaranteed operational safety net has been replaced by a reality in which local vulnerabilities can be exploited faster than external powers can react. The 300 immobilized tanks are therefore more than a statistic. They are a monument to the gap between strategic assumptions and operational reality. The fuel is gone. The combat capability it sustained disappeared with it. Iran did not defeat the IDF in a conventional battle. Iran removed its ability to fight that battle. 300 immobilized tanks, a shrinking Air Force reserve, a Pentagon in genuine panic, and a region beginning to understand that power is defined not only by firepower, but by the ability to identify the vulnerability on which everything else depends. The 96 hours are not the end of the story. They are the moment when its outcome became visible. What follows afterward are negotiations, diplomatic realignment, reconstruction, and the long effort to replace shattered strategic assumptions. But the fundamental rupture has already occurred. It happened the moment the fuel lifeline of an army that believed its logistics were secure was severed. Can Washington still reverse this operational reality before Israel's reserves are completely exhausted? Or has this campaign already crossed the point at which the military balance in the region can no longer be restored? Write your assessment in the comments. If this analysis helped you understand the situation beyond the headlines, share it, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. The next update will be decisive.